Welcome back. We walked alongside Lancelot as he arrived at Arthur's court in our last journey together. As he proved himself the greatest knight in all the realm. We witnessed the first dangerous spark between him and Queen Guinevere. A love that should never have been, yet could not be denied. In this episode, we explore more of his legendary deeds. Castles freed from ancient curses, innocence rescued from darkness. And alongside his tale, we will meet another soul, a young man who would rather scrub kitchen floors than trade on his noble name. His name is Gareth. 2 stories, 2 knights, 2 different faces of honor. One carries the weight of forbidden love, the other, the lightness of untested hope. Chapter 1: Lancelot's Legendary Deeds. Even the greatest knight must prove himself again and again. Fame is a fleeting thing, easily won, easily lost. And so Lancelot rode forth from Camelot, seeking not glory, but purpose. A way to silence the ache in his heart. His first journey took him north, to a place spoken of only in whispers, the Dolorous Guard. The Dolorous Guard. They called it the Castle of Sorrows. It stood on a barren hill, black towers clawing at grey skies. Around its walls, mist clung like mourning veils, and the air itself seemed heavy with old grief. Local villagers would not even look in its direction. They made signs against evil when they passed the road that led there. The castle was cursed, they said. Held by savage knights who took pleasure in cruelty. Many had tried to storm its gates. Many had failed. Some said magic protected it. Others said it was guarded by something worse than magic. Despair itself. Lancelot rode toward it alone as the sun began to set. The castle's silhouette grew darker against the dying light, like a wound in the sky. The drawbridge lowered slowly, almost invitingly, as though the castle itself were opening its jaws to swallow him whole. His horse's hooves echoed on the wooden planks. But Lancelot felt no fear. Perhaps because his heart already carried its own kind of darkness. The castle's gloom seemed almost familiar. Inside the courtyard, 10 knights in black armor waited for him. They stood in formation, silent as statues, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight. One by one, they came at him. One by one, he met them. The courtyard rang with the clash of steel on steel, the scrape of metal on stone. Lancelot moved like water, flowing around their strikes, finding the gaps in their defense. His sword traced patterns in the air, beautiful and deadly. The first knight fell, then the second, then the third. By the time the 10th collapsed to his knees, the courtyard was littered with broken shields and surrendered swords. Lancelot descended into the castle's dungeons, following the sound of chains and muffled weeping. There, in cells that stank of mold and misery, he found them. Over 200 souls, imprisoned in darkness. Knights who had challenged the castle and lost. Nobles kidnapped for ransom that would never come. Common folk taken for sport. When Lancelot broke open their chains, some wept. Some fell to their knees. Some simply stared, as though they'd forgotten what freedom looked like. Among them were several of Arthur's own knights, men who had been missing for months, given up for dead. But the castle had one final secret. In the deepest chamber, beyond a door sealed with iron and spellcraft, Lancelot found a great hall lit by no torch or fire. In its center stood a stone tablet, tall as a man, covered in ancient runes. The words seemed to shift and shimmer in the strange light. Lancelot approached slowly, his hand resting on his sword. When he touched the stone, the runes blazed bright, and he could suddenly read them. "This fortress shall be freed," they said, "by the greatest knight in all the world." The moment his fingers left the stone, something changed. The oppressive weight in the air lifted like a fever breaking. The mist beyond the walls began to dissolve. Sunlight, real sunlight, poured through the narrow windows for the first time in years. The runes on the tablet rearranged themselves, forming new words. "This is Lancelot's castle." The curse was broken. The dolorous god, the castle of sorrows, was his. Lancelot renamed it the Joyous God. Under his care, it became a place of refuge, a sanctuary for those in need. But that first night, as he stood on the highest tower watching the moon rise over his new domain, his thoughts drifted south to Camelot. To a woman with golden hair and eyes that haunted his dreams. The wind carried the scent of distant flowers, and for a moment, he let himself imagine they were from her garden. Then he closed his eyes and turned away. Rescue of the captured maidens. Not long after, while traveling the roads near Camelot, Lancelot came upon a group of farmers weeping by the roadside. Their daughters had been taken, they said, by a knight who called himself Peres. This Peres was known for his cruelty. He collected young women like trophies, keeping them locked in his mountain fortress. Many knights had challenged him. None had returned. Lancelot followed the trail into the hills, where the air grew thin and cold. Peres's fortress squatted on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by sheer cliffs. It looked less like a castle and more like a prison carved from the mountain itself. Lancelot rode up to the gates alone and called out his challenge. Peres emerged, a huge man in scarred armor, his face hidden behind a helmet shaped like a snarling beast. He laughed when he saw Lancelot, a sound like rocks grinding together. They fought in the shadow of the fortress, on ground so rocky that both men struggled to keep their footing. Peres fought with raw brutality, swinging his massive sword with the intent to maim and kill. He used every dirty trick he knew. Feints, sudden charges, strikes aimed at Lancelot's horse rather than at Lancelot himself. But Lancelot remained calm, his movements precise and swift. He wasn't just trying to defeat Peres. He wanted to take him alive, to bring him to justice before Arthur's court. The battle went on for nearly an hour before Lancelot found his opening. With a quick twist of his blade, he disarmed Peres, sending the man's sword clattering down the mountainside. Before Peres could recover, Lancelot had his own sword at the villain's throat. "Yield," Lancelot said quietly, "or die." Peres yielded. Inside the fortress, Lancelot found 23 young women, some who had been prisoners for over a year. Their relief was overwhelming. Some could barely walk. So long had they been confined. Lancelot bound Peres in chains and led the entire procession back to Camelot. The people of Camelot lined the streets to cheer as Lancelot rode through the gates. The rescued maidens behind him and Peres in chains at his saddle. "Lancelot! Lancelot!" they cried, throwing flowers and calling blessings. In the great hall, Arthur himself came down from the throne to embrace his greatest knight. "Once again, you bring honor to the Round Table," the king said, his voice warm with genuine affection. Lancelot knelt before him. "Everything I do," he said, "is for Camelot. For your glory, my lord." But even as he spoke, his eyes found Guinevere. She stood beside the throne, beautiful and regal in a gown of deep blue. Their gazes met and held. In that moment, the crowded hall seemed to fall away. There was a question in her eyes, and an answer in his. 8,000 words passed between them in silence. Then Lancelot looked down, breaking the spell. "For Camelot," he repeated softly. But in his heart, he shouted, "And for you, Guinevere. Always for you." Chapter 2: The Young Man from Orkney. Gareth arrives. While Lancelot rode the roads of Britain, performing deeds that would echo through the ages, another story was beginning far to the north. In the cold lands of Orkney, a young man was making a choice that would change his life forever. The Orkney family. The Orkney clan was one of the most powerful families in all of Britain. King Lot, who had once ruled those harsh northern lands, was now dead. But his legacy lived on through his 5 sons. Their mother was Morgause, Arthur's half-sister, a woman of great beauty and even greater ambition. She had borne 5 boys, each different from the others in temperament and fate. The eldest was Gawain, already a knight of the Round Table, famous for his strength and his temper. The second was Agravain, a man with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, always watching, always calculating. The third was Gaheris, gentle and kind, often overshadowed by his more dramatic brothers. The fourth was Gareth, the hero of our tale tonight. And the youngest was Mordred, a silent boy with old eyes, who seemed to carry shadows wherever he went. Gareth was 18 years old, tall and strong, with honest eyes and a smile that came easily. From childhood, he had listened to the tales of King Arthur's court. He had heard of the Round Table, where knights sat as equals regardless of their birth. He had heard of Lancelot, the greatest warrior in the world. And most of all, he had heard of the code they lived by: to protect the weak, to uphold justice, to live with honor. These stories set his heart on fire. But his mother, Morgause, would not hear of him leaving for Camelot. She had complicated feelings about Arthur, feelings she never fully explained. Some whispered that she and Arthur shared a secret, a dark moment in the past that had produced consequences neither could acknowledge. Whatever the truth, she wanted to keep Gareth close, safe under her control. "You are needed here," she would say whenever he mentioned Camelot. "Your place is in Orkney, with your family." On the morning of his 18th birthday, Gareth made his decision. He woke before dawn, dressed in plain traveling clothes, and packed only what he could carry. He left no note, knowing that any explanation would only bring his mother after him. From the window of his small room, he looked back at the castle one last time. The grey stones, the wind-swept courtyards, the cold sea beyond. This was his home. But Camelot was his destiny. As he rode south, Gareth made another decision. One that would define his entire journey. He could have arrived at Camelot as a prince of Orkney, brother to the famous Gawain. Doors would have opened for him instantly. He would have been welcomed, celebrated, granted knighthood as a matter of course. But Gareth wanted something more. He wanted to prove himself on his own merit. He wanted to know that when he finally sat at the round table, he had earned that seat, not inherited it. So he decided to hide who he was, to arrive as nobody, to see if Gareth the person could become Gareth the knight, without the weight of his famous name. Arriving at Camelot as Beaumains. It was Pentecost when Gareth arrived at Camelot, and the city was alive with celebration. Banners flew from every tower. The streets were crowded with nobles and commoners alike, all come for the great feast. Gareth had never seen anything so magnificent. The white walls of the castle seemed to glow in the spring sunshine. The towers reached toward heaven. This was Arthur's dream made stone. Gareth made his way to the great hall, where the feast was being held. He wore simple clothes and kept his head down, trying to blend in with the servants and attendants. When at last he was brought before King Arthur, the entire court fell silent, curious about this tall stranger. Arthur sat on his throne, Guinevere beside him, and all around them stood the knights of the Round Table in their finest armor. Gareth's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. "What is your name?" Arthur asked kindly. The young man took a breath. "I am called Beaumains, my lord." The name meant fair hands in French. A few courtiers chuckled at the strange choice. Arthur studied him with those wise grey eyes. "And what brings you to Camelot, Beaumains?" This was the moment. Gareth could have asked to become a knight. Instead, he bowed low and said, "I come to ask 3 favors of you, great king. But I will only name the first today. The other 2, I will ask for in 1 year's time." The hall buzzed with whispers. This was highly unusual. Arthur leaned forward, intrigued. "Very well. What is your first request?" Gareth raised his head and spoke clearly. "I ask for food and shelter in your castle for 1 year. Let me work in your kitchens. That is all I desire." The silence was absolute. Then someone laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. It was Sir Kay, Arthur's foster brother and the master of the household. "The kitchens?" Kay said incredulously. "A strapping lad like you wants to wash dishes? What kind of fool are you?" But Arthur held up a hand for silence. "If that is your wish, Beaumains, it shall be granted. You may work in the kitchens for 1 year, and at the end of that time, you may ask your other 2 favors." Gareth bowed deeply. "Thank you, my lord." And so began the strangest year of Gareth's life. Kay put him to work doing the dirtiest, hardest jobs in the entire castle. He scrubbed enormous cooking pots until his hands were raw. He hauled water from the well, bucket after bucket, until his shoulders ached. He cleaned out the stables, chopped firewood, swept floors, and took out the garbage. Kay seemed to take special pleasure in humiliating him, always finding new tasks that were beneath even the lowest servant. "Beaumains," Kay would shout across the courtyard. "Your hands are so beautiful and clean. Come scrub out this chamber pot." The other servants would laugh, though some felt pity for the young man who bore it all without complaint. Kay nicknamed him Pretty Hands and made sure everyone used it. But Gareth never responded to the taunts. He did his work quietly, thoroughly, and without resentment. What Kay didn't know, what no one knew except one person, was that Gareth was not an ordinary kitchen boy. His posture, his bearing, the way he moved, all spoke of noble training. And someone noticed. Lancelot, walking through the courtyard one day, saw Gareth carrying a heavy load of firewood. Something in the young man's stance, the set of his shoulders, caught his attention. This was not how a commoner carried a burden. This was how a trained warrior distributed weight. Lancelot began to observe Beaumains more closely. One evening, he found Gareth alone in the practice yard behind the stables, going through sword forms with a stick. The movements were precise, practiced, almost professional. Lancelot stepped out of the shadows. "You fight like a knight," he said quietly. Gareth froze, then slowly turned. "Sir Lancelot," he said, bowing. "I simply practice what I remember from watching warriors." Lancelot smiled slightly. "Do you? Well, your memory is remarkably good." He picked up another stick. "Let's see how much you remember." And there, behind the stables, as the sun set and stars began to appear, the greatest knight in the world sparred with a kitchen boy. Lancelot pulled his strikes, of course, but he was impressed. This young man had real skill. When they finished, both were breathing hard. "Who are you really?" Lancelot asked. Gareth met his eyes steadily. "Someone who needs to prove himself, sir. That's all." Lancelot nodded slowly. "Then I will not press you. But know this, when you are ready to reveal yourself, you will have a friend." From that night on, Lancelot would occasionally give Gareth pointers, teach him techniques, correct his form. Always in secret, always away from prying eyes. It was their private arrangement, one that Gareth treasured more than anything. The greatest irony of all was that Gawain never recognized his own brother. Gareth had changed since Gawain had last seen him, grown taller and broader, but still, you would think a brother would know. Yet Gareth was careful. Whenever Gawain walked through the kitchens, Gareth found a reason to be elsewhere. He kept his head down, his face averted. Once, Gawain actually spoke to him, asking for more wine at a feast. Gareth served him with a bowed head and a mumbled, "Yes, my lord." Gawain never gave him a second glance. It hurt. Sometimes, to be so close to his family yet so far away. To hear Gawain's booming laugh from across the hall and not be able to join in. To watch his brother celebrate victories and share stories with the other knights. Knowing he could not be part of that fellowship. Not yet. But Gareth held firm to his purpose. He would earn his place. He would prove his worth without his name. And slowly, the year turned. Summer faded to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring again. Gareth's hands, once smooth, became calloused and strong. His patience, tested daily by Kay's cruelty, deepened into something unshakable. He learned humility in that kitchen. Learned that no work was beneath him if it was done honestly. And perhaps most importantly, he learned to see beyond rank and title, to value people for who they were, not what they were called. When Pentecost came around again, Gareth woke before dawn and looked at himself in a bucket of water. He barely recognized the face that looked back. Older, leaner, harder. Ready. Chapter 3, Gareth's Trial by Quest. It was Pentecost morning, exactly 1 year since Gareth had arrived at Camelot. The great hall was once again filled with nobles and knights, and King Arthur sat in judgment and in celebration. It was the tradition that no feast could begin until some adventure had presented itself, and Arthur had just begun to wonder if this year would break that custom when the doors burst open. The request for adventure. A young woman strode into the hall, her bearing proud despite the dust of travel on her cloak. She was beautiful in a fierce way, with dark hair and flashing eyes. Her name was Lynette, and she had ridden hard for 3 days to reach Camelot. She knelt before Arthur, breathing hard. "My Lord King," she said, her voice ringing out, "I come seeking aid. My sister, the Lady Lioness, is besieged in her castle by the Red Knight of the Red Lands. He is a monster who has sworn to take the castle and my sister both, by force if necessary. We need your greatest knight to free her." Arthur nodded gravely. "You shall have a champion, my lady. I will send." But before he could finish, a voice rang out from the back of the hall. "My Lord King." Everyone turned. There stood Beaumains, the kitchen boy, still wearing his stained work clothes. "I claim my second request. Grant me this quest." The hall erupted. Kay burst out laughing, slapping his knee. "The kitchen boy? This is rich. What will you do, Beaumains? Cook the Red Knight to death?" Other courtiers joined in the laughter. Lynette's face flushed with anger. "Is this a joke?" she demanded, turning on Arthur. "I ask for a knight, and you offer me a servant? I have traveled for days. My sister's life hangs in the balance, and you mock me with this. This scullion?" But Arthur was watching Gareth's face, and what he saw there was not foolishness or pride, but steady determination. "I promise this young man 3 requests," Arthur said slowly. "I will honor my word. Beaumains, you may have this quest." Gareth bowed. "And my 3rd request, my lord, let Sir Lancelot grant me knighthood." A murmur ran through the hall. Lancelot stood from his seat at the round table and walked forward. His eyes met Gareth's, and there was understanding there, and something like pride. "It would be my honor," Lancelot said. That night, in a small chapel lit only by candles, Lancelot performed the dubbing ceremony. Gareth knelt on the cold stone floor in borrowed armor, and Lancelot laid his sword on each shoulder. "Be thou a knight," Lancelot said quietly. "Rise, Sir Beaumains, though I suspect that is not your true name." He smiled faintly. "When you are ready to tell me who you really are, I will be listening." Gareth rose, feeling the weight of the armor and the weightlessness of joy. He was a knight at last. But his joy was short-lived. The next morning, when they set out on the quest, Lynette made her feelings brutally clear. She rode ahead of him, her back stiff with disdain, and spoke without turning around. "I cannot believe I am forced to travel with a kitchen boy. You smell of cooking grease and dishwater. When the Red Knight sees you, he will die laughing before you even draw your sword." Gareth bore her insults in silence, just as he had borne Kay's mockery for a year. "My lady," he said calmly, "I understand your doubts. But I ask only that you give me a chance to prove myself." She snorted. "Prove yourself? You're going to get us both killed. I should have demanded a real knight. Gawain, or Lancelot, or anyone but you." The words stung, but Gareth kept his face neutral and his voice steady. "Then let me earn your respect through my actions, not my words." They rode for 2 days, and Lynette's contempt never wavered. Every insult she could think of, she hurled at him. His armor was ill-fitting. His horse was a nag. His sword looked like it had been pulled from a rubbish heap. He was too young, too green, too foolish. If she hoped to provoke him into anger, to make him turn back or lash out, she failed. Gareth simply absorbed it all, his patience as deep as the sea. The Black Knight. On the 3rd day, they came to a river crossed by a single narrow bridge. At the far end, sitting motionless on a black horse, was a knight in black armor. He raised his hand as they approached. "None may pass this bridge," he called out, his voice hollow behind his visor. "Without defeating me in combat. Turn back, or face me." Lynette laughed bitterly. "Well, kitchen boy, here's your chance to die. At least it will be quick." But Gareth was already dismounting, checking his armor, settling his shield on his arm. He walked onto the bridge, his footsteps steady on the old wood. The Black Knight spurred his horse forward, and they met in the center with a crash that echoed across the water. The Black Knight was strong, frighteningly strong. His first blow nearly knocked Gareth from his feet. His sword came down like a hammer, again and again, relentless. Gareth gave ground, step by step, his arms going numb from blocking. He could hear Lynette watching from behind him, probably already composing the story of how the kitchen boy died on his first real fight. But then Gareth remembered something Lancelot had taught him during those secret practice sessions. Strength can be turned against itself. The next time the Black Knight swung, Gareth didn't try to block the full force. Instead, he deflected it, letting the blade slide past him, using the knight's own momentum against him. The Black Knight stumbled, off balance for just a moment. And in that moment, Gareth struck. His sword found the gap between helmet and breastplate. The Black Knight went down heavily, his sword clattering on the stones. Gareth stood over him, breathing hard. "Yield?" The Black Knight raised his hand in surrender. "I yield. You fought well." Gareth helped the fallen knight to his feet, then turned to see Lynette staring at him. For a moment, he thought he saw surprise in her eyes. But she quickly composed herself. "You were lucky," she said coldly. "The next one will kill you." The Green Knight. They rode on. 2 days later, they came to a dense forest, and at its entrance stood another knight, this one in armor the color of new leaves. The Green Knight was even larger than the Black Knight, and when he laughed at Gareth's challenge, it sounded like distant thunder. "A beardless boy? This will be entertaining." This fight was different. The Green Knight didn't rely on brute strength alone. He was fast, unnaturally fast for such a large man, and his techniques were complex, full of feints and unexpected angles. Gareth found himself constantly on the defensive, barely keeping up. A strike got through his guard and hit his shoulder, sending pain lancing down his arm. Another blow dented his helmet, making his ears ring. Lynette watched, her hands clenched tight on her reins. Despite herself, despite her scorn, she found she didn't want to watch him die. There was something about the way he fought, the way he kept getting back up after every hit, that touched something in her. "Get up," she whispered under her breath, surprising herself. "Get up, you stubborn fool." And Gareth did get up. Every time he was knocked down, he rose. His armor was battered, his body aching, but his eyes were clear and focused. He began to see the pattern in the Green Knight's attacks, began to anticipate the feints. When the opening finally came, he took it. A quick thrust, perfectly placed, and the Green Knight's sword went flying. Gareth's blade was at his throat. "Yield." The Green Knight laughed again, but this time with respect. "I yield, young knight. You have more skill than I credited." When Gareth turned back to Lynette, she was looking at him differently. Not quite with respect, not yet, but the edge of her contempt had softened slightly. "Perhaps you're not completely hopeless," she said. It was the first kind thing she'd said, even if she didn't mean it kindly. The Red Knight. 3 days more brought them to a mountain pass guarded by yet another knight. This one wore armor the color of blood, and he was faster and more skilled than either of the previous two. The Red Knight fought with a style Gareth recognized. It was similar to Gawain's, all power and aggression. The battle raged from morning until noon, both knights dripping with sweat inside their armor, both refusing to yield. It was Gareth's endurance that won the day in the end. All those months of hauling water and chopping wood had built a strength that went deeper than muscle. When the Red Knight finally began to tire, Gareth was still standing strong. His final blow was almost gentle, knocking the Red Knight's helmet askew without seriously injuring him. "Please," Gareth said, gasping for breath. "I do not wish to kill you. Yield, and live." The Red Knight sat down heavily on a rock and pulled off his helmet, revealing a weathered face and gray hair. "You are young," he said, "but you fight like an old warrior." "I yield, Sir Knight." "Who are you, truly?" Gareth helped him up. "Just a man trying to do right," he said. "That is all any of us can be." When Lynette joined them, her face was different. The scorn was gone entirely now, replaced by something Gareth couldn't quite read. That night, as they camped under the stars, she finally spoke to him without mockery. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I have been cruel, unforgivably cruel, and you have borne it with more grace than I would have believed possible." Gareth looked at her across the fire. In the flickering light, he saw her clearly for the first time. Not just her beauty, but her strength, her fierce loyalty to her sister, her pride. "You were testing me," he said. "It wasn't a question." She nodded slowly. "Many knights have courage in battle but lose their temper at the slightest insult. They are easily manipulated, easily controlled by their pride. I needed to know if you were different." "And am I?" Gareth asked. Lynette smiled, and it transformed her face. "Yes," she said softly. "You are." Something passed between them in that moment, something neither had expected. Gareth felt his heart begin to beat faster. Lynette looked away, suddenly flustered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crack and pop, both of them aware that something had shifted, something had changed. Chapter 4: The Siege and the Revelation. The next morning, they crested a final hill and saw it, Lioness Castle, surrounded by an army of red tents. The siege had been going on for months, and the signs of it were everywhere. The fields around the castle were trampled to mud. Smoke rose from campfires, and hanging from posts all around the encampment were shields and pieces of armor, trophies taken from the knights who had tried to break the siege and failed. The Red Knight of the Red Lands. At the center of it all was the largest pavilion, blood red in color, and before it stood the most fearsome warrior Gareth had seen yet. The Red Knight of the Red Lands was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders like a bull. His armor was the color of rust and old blood, and hanging from his belt were the spurs and gauntlets of the knights he had killed. When he saw Gareth approaching, he laughed, a sound like metal grinding on stone. "Another fool come to die," the Red Knight called out. "Good. I was growing bored." He gestured to the displayed armor around his camp. "You'll join my collection, boy. Though I must say, you look barely old enough to grow a beard. Did they send me a child?" Gareth said nothing. He simply drew his sword and waited. They fought on the trampled ground before the castle gates. Inside, Lady Lioness and her household watched from the battlements, hardly daring to hope. Beside Gareth's horse, Lynette stood with her hands clasped tight, whispering prayers to saints she'd half forgotten. The Red Knight of the Red Lands was everything the previous knights had been and more. Stronger than the Black Knight, faster than the Green Knight, more skilled than the Red Knight. He fought with the confidence of a man who had never lost. The battle raged for hours. Morning became afternoon, afternoon became evening. Both men were exhausted, their armor dented and torn, their movements growing slower. Gareth had been knocked down 4 times. His sword had a notch in the blade. His left arm hung useless at his side, probably broken. But he would not yield. He could not yield. Too many people were counting on him. The Red Knight of the Red Lands seemed surprised that Gareth was still standing. "You should be dead," he panted. "Why won't you just die?" Gareth spat blood and raised his sword with his one good arm. "Because," he said hoarsely, "I made a promise." The Red Knight came at him one more time, raising his sword for a blow that would have split Gareth from shoulder to hip. But he was tired, and his guard was low. Gareth saw it, saw the gap, saw his chance. He threw himself forward, inside the arc of the Red Knight's swing, using his shield as a battering ram. The Red Knight stumbled backward. Gareth hooked his foot and sent the huge man crashing to the ground. Before he could rise, Gareth was on him, his sword at the Red Knight's throat. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Gareth spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yield. Go to Camelot and beg King Arthur's mercy. Kill no more, and you may yet live." The Red Knight of the Red Lands looked into Gareth's eyes and saw something there that made him shudder. Not hatred, not triumph, but a kind of weary sadness. "I yield," he said. "I yield to you, Sir Knight." Gareth stepped back, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Around him, the Red Knight's army was laying down their weapons. The siege was over. Lady Lioness. The castle gates swung open, and people poured out, weeping with relief and joy. At their head was Lady Lioness. And when Gareth saw her, he forgot his pain, forgot his exhaustion, forgot everything. She was more beautiful than the morning star. Her hair was gold, her eyes the color of summer sky, and when she smiled at him, it was like the sun coming out after a long winter. "You saved us," she said simply, and knelt before him. "My knight, my champion, how can I ever repay you?" Gareth tried to speak, found he couldn't, and simply held out his hand to help her rise. When their fingers touched, something electric passed between them. Lioness felt it too. She looked up at him, startled, and their eyes met and held. Behind them, Lynette watched her sister and Gareth, and felt her heart break just a little. She had come to care for him during their journey, to admire his courage and his kindness. Perhaps, in another world, something might have grown between them. But she knew her sister. She knew the look in Lioness' eyes. And she knew, with a certainty that was almost painful, that Lioness and Gareth were meant for each other. So she stepped forward, smiling, and embraced her sister. "You're safe," she whispered. "That's all that matters." Over Lioness' shoulder, her eyes met Gareth's. He looked at her with concern, as if sensing her pain. She shook her head slightly. "It's all right," the gesture said. "Be happy." And then she let them go, these two who were falling in love before her eyes, and told herself she was content to have played her part in bringing them together. The journey back to Camelot was triumphant. The Black Knight, the Green Knight, the Red Knight, and even the Red Knight of the Red Lands rode with them, having all sworn fealty to Gareth. They formed a procession that grew larger as they traveled, as word spread of the kitchen boy who had defeated the terror of the Red Lands. By the time they reached Camelot, hundreds of people lined the road, cheering. In the great hall, Arthur waited with the assembled court. When Gareth walked in, still wearing his battered armor, leading the train of defeated knights, a murmur ran through the crowd. And then, from the round table, a voice rang out in shock and joy. "Gareth?" It was Gawain, on his feet, staring. "Gareth? Is it truly you?" Gareth pulled off his helmet, and the secret was revealed. The kitchen boy was a prince of Orkney. Beaumains, fair hands, was really Gareth, son of King Lot, brother to the mighty Gawain. The hall erupted in astonishment. Arthur began to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh of delight. "I knew you were no ordinary servant. I knew it from the first." Kay's face was red with embarrassment. He stumbled forward. "My lord, I mean, Prince Gareth, I beg your forgiveness for my treatment." But Gareth held up his hand. "There is nothing to forgive, Sir Kay. You treated me exactly as I appeared to be. If anything, I should thank you. Working in the kitchens taught me humility. It taught me that true worth has nothing to do with birth or title. Those lessons are worth more than gold." He turned to Arthur and knelt. "My Lord King, I ask to join your round table not as Gawain's brother, not as a prince of Orkney, but as a knight who has proven himself through deed and trial." Arthur came down from his throne and raised Gareth up. "You have proven yourself beyond any doubt. Sir Gareth. Your place at the round table is earned, not given." And so Gareth was led to an empty seat, one that bore his name in letters of gold. He sat, and all around him the knights rose to their feet and struck their swords against their shields in salute. The sound was like thunder, like the world itself acknowledging a new hero. That evening, at the feast held in Gareth's honor, he approached Arthur with Lady Lioness at his side. "My lord," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I have defeated many foes, but I find myself conquered by something stronger than any knight. With your permission, I would ask for Lady Lioness' hand in marriage." Lioness blushed, but her smile was radiant. Arthur looked at them both, these two young people so clearly in love, and he felt a pang in his heart. He remembered being young. He remembered what it felt like to love without complication, without secrets, without the weight of kingdoms and crowns. "You have my permission and my blessing," he said warmly. "Let the wedding be held next spring, when the world is new and full of hope." The celebration that followed was joyous. Musicians played. People danced. Gareth and Lioness moved through the crowd in a daze of happiness, barely believing their good fortune. And in a corner, Lynette watched them, smiling through the ache in her chest. Lancelot appeared beside her, offering her a cup of wine. "Love is a strange thing," he said quietly, his eyes distant. "Sometimes we love where we should not. Sometimes we cannot have what we love most." Lynette looked at him, seeing something in his face that mirrored her own pain. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, it is." Chapter 5, Light and Shadow. And so Camelot reached the height of its glory. The round table was full of the finest knights in all the world. Peace reigned across the land. The people prospered. It seemed as though Arthur's dream of a perfect kingdom had finally come true. But in every light, there are shadows. And the brighter the light, the darker the shadows become. Lancelot and Gareth's friendship. In the days that followed, Gareth sought out Lancelot to thank him properly. "You gave me knighthood," he said. "But more than that, you gave me friendship when I was nobody. You taught me when I was just a kitchen boy. I will never forget that." Lancelot clasped his shoulder warmly. "You were never just anything, Gareth. I saw what you were from the beginning. You will be a great knight, perhaps even greater than me one day." They became close friends, these two. Gareth admired Lancelot above all other men, saw him as the perfect embodiment of chivalry. And Lancelot felt a genuine affection for the younger knight, a protective fondness. In some ways, Gareth reminded Lancelot of what he himself had once been. Young, idealistic, unburdened by secrets. This friendship, formed in joy, would one day be tested in the most terrible way imaginable. But for now, neither knew what was coming. For now, they were simply two knights, brothers in arms, bound by mutual respect and affection. The castle had never been more splendid. Tournaments were held in the spring meadows, with knights from all over Britain coming to test their skill. Feasts filled the great hall with light and laughter. The Round Table's knights rode out to defend the weak and uphold justice, and everywhere they went, people blessed their names. Arthur governed wisely and well, Guinevere was beloved by all, and the kingdom flourished. On summer evenings, you could walk through Camelot and hear music drifting from the windows, see lovers strolling in the gardens, watch children playing in the courtyards. It was everything Arthur had dreamed of when he first pulled the sword from the stone. A kingdom of law and order, of honor and justice, where might served right and not the other way around. If you had been there, in that golden moment, you might have believed it would last forever. Lancelot's inner struggle. But in his chambers at night, Lancelot stood by the window and stared out at the darkness. The joy of the court felt hollow to him, like music heard through a wall. He was the most celebrated knight in the kingdom, friend to the king, idol of the young, praised by everyone. And he was miserable. Because every day he saw her, Guinevere. He saw her at breakfast, at court, at feasts and ceremonies. He saw her hand resting on Arthur's arm, saw her smile at her husband, saw the life she led that could never include him. And sometimes, when their eyes met across a crowded room, he saw the same pain reflected there. She felt it too. This impossible, unbearable love. It lived between them like a third presence, invisible but always there. They were careful. They never spoke of it, never acted on it, never did anything that would betray Arthur's trust. But the feeling was there, growing stronger with every passing day, like a crack in the foundation of a great building. And Lancelot knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that something would have to give eventually. Love like this could not be contained forever. Merlin's foreknowledge. In his tower, Merlin sat among his books and instruments, reading the future in patterns of smoke and starlight. He was old now, far older than most men realized, and tired. He had seen so much, guided so much, and he knew how little of it mattered in the end. Destiny was like a river. You could dig channels, build dams, try to redirect the flow, but eventually, it would go where it wanted to go. He saw Lancelot standing alone in the dark, fighting his love for the queen. He saw Guinevere in her chambers, weeping silently where no one could hear. He saw young Gareth laughing with his bride-to-be, innocent and trusting, not knowing what fate had in store for him. And he saw Mordred, Arthur's hidden son, watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes, waiting for his moment. The brighter the flame, Merlin murmured to himself, the faster it consumes its fuel. He could have warned them, could have told Arthur about Lancelot and Guinevere, told Lancelot about Mordred's true parentage, told them all what was coming. But what would be the point? They would not listen, or they would not believe, or they would believe and try to change things and only make them worse. Some things must play out as they were written. Even wizards cannot prevent the fall of kingdoms. Seeds of darkness. At the feast celebrating Gareth's betrothal, most people were too full of joy to notice the shadows. But they were there. Agravain, Gareth's own brother, watched Lancelot with narrow, jealous eyes. Why should he have all the glory? He muttered to himself. He's not even of royal blood. Just a Frenchman who got lucky. The seeds of resentment were being planted, slowly but surely. And in a corner, half hidden by shadows, stood Mordred. He was barely more than a boy, Arthur's nephew in name, though those who knew the truth understood he was much more than that. He was Arthur's son, the result of a night Arthur wished he could forget. A living reminder of a terrible mistake. But Mordred was no mistake. He was deliberate. He was purposeful. He was patient. He watched his father on the throne, watched Lancelot being celebrated, watched Gareth being welcomed into the Brotherhood of Knights. And he waited. One day, all of this would be his. The crown, the throne, the kingdom. He had been promised it, or so he believed, by blood and by right. If Arthur and his precious knights stood in the way, well, every fortress, no matter how strong, has a weakness. Every hero has a flaw. Mordred simply had to find them. And then, when the time was right, he would strike. And so we leave Camelot at the height of its glory, poised on the edge of a blade. 2 stories, 2 knights. Lancelot, the greatest warrior in the world, carrying the weight of a love that could destroy everything he holds dear. Gareth, the youngest and most hopeful, still believing in the goodness of the world, in the power of honor and truth. One represents the Round Table's grandeur, all it has achieved. The other represents its future, all it could become. But fate, as we know, is rarely kind to heroes. The very things that make them great, their passions, their loyalties, their loves, these become the weapons that undo them. Lancelot's devotion will be tested beyond endurance. Gareth's innocence will be shattered. And Camelot itself, that shining city on the hill, will learn that nothing gold can stay. But that is for another night. For now, let yourself rest in this golden moment. Picture Camelot as it was, the white towers catching the sunset, the banners flying bright against the summer sky. Hear the distant sound of laughter, the songs drifting from the great hall. Feel the warm breeze carrying the scent of roses from Guinevere's garden. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort. Your breathing is slow and easy. Your body is heavy and relaxed. The story surrounds you like a soft blanket, and you can let it carry you gently into sleep. When next we meet, we will venture into an even deeper tale of love and fate. We will meet Tristan, the warrior who could not help but love where he should not. And Isolde, the woman torn between duty and desire. Their story will break your heart and mend it again. But that is for tomorrow, or the next night, or whenever you return. For now, simply breathe. Simply rest. Let the weight of the world fall away. You are safe. You are still. You are drifting into sleep like a leaf floating on a quiet stream. Glory and love, loyalty and destiny. This is the life of a knight. This is the dream of Camelot. And it is with you, even as you sleep. Good night.